Swarthmore College has one of the loveliest campuses in America. Surrounding it is the Scott Arboretum, and there's a forest that leads down to the beautiful Crum Creek. This creek is the inspiration for two works by internationally renowned environmental artist Stacy Levy. Andrea Packard explains.
In the List Gallery, we're celebrating the completion of her installation titled Waterways. She mapped the Crum Creek watershed using thousands of vessels rescued from our collective waste stream. We're also putting the finishing touches on Crum Creek meander, a 300-foot-long sculpture on parish lawn. This enormous form reflects and animates some of the myriad forces in nature that we all too often forget.
I asked Stacy how far back did her interest in nature go.
When I was little, I grew up next to the Fairmount Park near the Wissahickon. My house backed onto the woods, and I played in this stream that had a tendency to run fairly dry in the summer, but after a rainstorm, it would run in full flood. I would go down there and sail stick boats down it, make dams. And I thought it was wonderful, but it was really smelly after a big rainstorm. It took me years to realize that I had been playing in a combined sewer ditch. For a long time, I didn't really know where the Schuylkill went. You went down the Kelly Drive, beautiful, looked like a Thomas Eakins painting, and then it disappeared at the city, and I never understood where it went. Now I have a very good idea of where it went, and I think it's important for everyone to know your waterways and almost to be able to navigate in your head by which side of the river or creek you're on.
Waterways, her List Gallery installation, encourages visitors to see how they fit into the system of creeks and rivers that surround Swarthmore, Pennsylvania.
When someone walks into this piece, I want them to be amazed at the overall pattern the watershed makes. Seeing that dendritic pattern that our watersheds are here on the East Coast are just gorgeous and imitate that branching structure of trees and our veins. And I also want them to go down into it and find where they are on the watershed. Where your backyard stream runs into a bigger branch of something else and then runs into a larger creek and then runs into the river. As part of the show, we're going to have people mark their house. In time, all these red dots will accrue.
How does Stacy construct these projects? Andrea Packard explains one particular skill that Stacy has used to great advantage over the years.
Stacy is outstanding in her field, in part because she's good at getting us to stand out there with her.
I don't do work in my studio and then have shipped with white gloves and delivered. We're out there with rubber gloves and everyone has to pitch in. It does take a village to put up this kind of work.
A number of volunteers from Swarthmore Borough helped Stacy and her longtime and invaluable assistant Fred Battaglia to install both works. In the case of Waterways, Stacy details some of the steps in the process.
Creating a watershed map that would fit into the space, getting our USGS maps all together, because that's what we're going to use to find all this water in the highly built environment. You can see Fred on the parapet of the bridge throwing a bucket in with a rope and then pulling up 40 pounds worth of water and then putting it in the car, very carefully labeled, because if this is mislabeled, it's just like a wine collection, which becomes slightly worthless when you lose your labels.
They also had to collect containing vessels and received over 1,000 from Gamber Container Incorporated. I drove out to Swarthmore a couple times to watch the installation progress of Stacy's outdoor piece, Crum Creek Meander. It was very cold, and yet Stacy and Fred always had volunteers uncomplainingly helping out doing this very physical work. I asked Stacy how she became an environmental artist.
I had a very strong interest in nature and drew a lot of botanical drawings, and I thought I'd be a botanist. My aunt is a very well-known landscape architect, and I often worked at her firm. So I had a lot of initiation with the landscape world, and the idea of landscape design was always part of my thinking. I come from a long line of artists, but I really want to be a scientist because they're much more rare in my family. I also had trouble with the impracticality of art. It didn't seem to be doing enough, making enough change, and I worried about that. I went to Quaker school for 13 years, and everyone there thought art was a great thing to do, but perhaps you should do it on the weekends after you've done some real work. That had a huge influence on me, wondering about the value of being an artist. It took a long time for me to realize that there was a great deal of value in being an artist. Meanwhile, I'm in college and I'm taking a lot of forestry courses. I grew up in the woods, I wanted to know how they worked, and I became fascinated by natural processes and how things changed. When I graduated with an art degree, it's very hard to get a job. I began a forestry business utilizing my knowledge gained studying ecological processes and applying them to the landscape.
She and her friend and business partner, Adam Kuby, called themselves Sear Limited, and they revitalized woodlands for various individual and corporate clients.
Instead of doing the typical forestry that Yale would have trained me for, creating a forest that its value was how much lumber you could get out of it, I was creating a value in the forest with Adam, which was all about bringing the backyard into the forest, giving people a way to enjoy their woodlands. Creating these places where wildlands were more part of the corporate landscape was beneficial to everyone, and it helped preserve forests that would otherwise have been cut down and turned into parking lots.
On rainy days, Stacy would make art and long to somehow combine her art and forestry interests.
When I went to grad school at Tyler and started trying to mush process and art together.
Stacy describes her art as coming out of the minimalist tradition.
I always think of my works being like a raspberry, where they're made up of lots of little repeated things, but it makes a whole.
You can clearly see many of Stacy's artistic ideas in her outdoor piece at Swarthmore. She is interested in the spatial context of her work.
The Crum Creek meander is made for all times of day and all seasons too. It's very Christo-esque. I really love Christo and Jean-Claude, and I think the greatest things about their work is about how it shows the topography of the place. I never knew Central Park in the same way until I saw it with the gates in it. And so I want to be able to do the same.
She often uses industrial materials and processes in a poetic way to make a visual metaphor.
Industrial materials, we're going to have to live with them, so let's live with them in a slightly different way. I often try and conjure up a sense of water using other strange man-made material. This piece made out of vinyl, which is used for separating cold spaces from hot spaces. It's on the back of refrigerated trucks, cold storage places. I happen to think this material is fabulous. It's a little like antique glass. It's super durable, which is something that if you're collaborating with nature, with wind, you really need it to be durable. An industrial material that responds to nature. What I was responding to was the Crum Creek, this wonderful stream at the bottom of the campus that nobody ever gets to see unless you're intrepid and you hike down to the woods. And I wanted to bring this creek up to people who were walking to dinner. I thought maybe they'll walk through my piece if I put it between their classrooms and the dining hall. Drawing a line on the landscape that somehow you had to interact with. It seems so simple to have a curtain out there in the middle of the landscape, but it's extraordinary what it takes. Once we have settled on this material, we have to figure out exactly how much of it there is, and we're buying in these huge rolls. My trusty assistant Fred did all the cutting of it, and he set up this incredible measuring contraption. Here's the pipe. It's been bent in Chicago. There's 1,000 units of each piece of hardware that has to be used, and each of them had to be painted. And I'm always looking for something that is telling me what color I might want to investigate. And the purplishness that trees get was a kind of purple that I was looking for that would have a glow in twilight but might blend into the sky during the middle of the day. And I keep seeing this really amazing vinyl that's a different color. It's black and super reflective. This reflective quality just had me floored, so I knew I had to use some black in the project too.
Crum Creek meander, a river of vinyl, light, and wind, is beautiful and thought-provoking. Stacy Levy combines science and art, aesthetics and consciousness raising, and she once doubted the value of becoming an artist. Andrea Packard eloquently sums up the value for all of us of what Stacy does.
I was thinking of that old phrase, we live in a world of our making. That mantra of 20th century constructivism takes on new meanings in this time of climate change. Scientists are referring to our times as the Anthropocene, a time in which human industry has fundamentally altered the geology of our world. What is the role of the artist in the face of climate change? And how can creativity help us overcome those habits of seeing that have helped lead us into this ecological crisis? What can be done to reawaken our connection to nature? It's really exciting to encounter a relatively new sphere of artistic practice, environmental art, which is represented so well here today by Stacy Levy.